Major breakthroughs in unsolved cold cases can give hope to those impacted by the case that justice might soon come and the case will finally be closed. It can also give hope to other unsolved true crime victims that their own breakthrough might just be around the corner. Number 5. A strange unsolved cold case that appeared on a 1991 episode of the show Unsolved Mysteries got a major update last year. Detectives were finally able to arrest the man they thought was responsible for taking the life of Roger Dean in 1985. The case didn't seem too out of the ordinary on the face of it, but a deeper look left many investigators scratching their heads. On the morning of November 21st, 1985, a man in a ski mask broke into the Dean's home in Colorado. The criminal forced Roger to tie up his wife, Doris, then took Roger into another room. Doris couldn't hear what they were saying, but at some point, Roger told the intruder he had $30,000 in a bank account they could go and get. As they were leaving to go and get the money, for some reason, the intruder attacked Roger. He was struck with multiple bullets and passed away at the scene. Nothing was stolen, and the criminal fled from the house, leaving behind the mask. At first, it looked like a robbery gone wrong, but there were too many pieces of the puzzle that didn't add up. Roger only had signs of a cord around one of his wrists, leading investigators to believe he hadn't actually been tied up. He was also wearing contact lenses, but investigators found his glasses inside with tape over the lenses, as if they had been used to fake a blindfolding. Also, the break-in occurred at about 7 a.m. Usually, Roger would leave for work 45 minutes earlier, but witnesses saw Roger in his garage, looking as if he was waiting for something. Strangest of all was the fact that Roger had been depositing money from his business account into a private bank account. That was the money he had planned to give to the intruder. Investigators believed that Roger had been in on a scheme to fake a robbery and claim back the money, but something had gone terribly wrong. His family has always disputed his involvement, though. 5 years later, in 1990, the case took another weird turn when Doris and her daughter, Tammy, claimed to receive a threatening letter demanding $100,000, which the writer claimed Roger owed him. He also made phone calls and sent cassette tapes of his demands. Working with police and the FBI, Doris followed the instructions and left the money in an alley in downtown Denver, but nobody came to collect it. It was the last they heard from the criminal. Investigators weren't sure if the person extorting the family and the man who took Roger's life were the same person, but progress in both cases quickly slowed down and the case went cold. It was only with the development of genetic genealogy that detectives got the break in the case. The mask that had been left behind had hair fibers, giving them a DNA profile of the criminal. Detectives used genealogy to identify the criminal's parents. They then tailed one of his sons, Michael Jefferson. Jefferson was 64 years old in 2021. Detectives were able to get his DNA from a water bottle he had discarded, and they discovered a match to the fibers on the mask. His voice also allegedly matched that of the extortionist. Jefferson's case is yet to go to trial, but even if the culprit has finally been caught, there are still some unsolved mysteries in this case. Number 4. Police investigating a cold case from England used an update in the investigation to call for information. In 2021, 2 people were arrested for taking the life of Carol Morgan in 1981. But unfortunately, that hasn't meant the case has been closed. This isn't the first time somebody had been arrested for the unsolved crime, but so far nobody has been charged. The crime took place on August 13th, 1981. Carol was 36 years old at the time and owned the shop called Morgan's Store in Linslade. It was a traditional corner shop selling groceries with a living space above the shop and residential streets surrounding it. Carol was alone at the shop when she was attacked with what police described as a sharp and heavy object. There isn't a whole lot of information available to the public about this case, and details are scarce. It's not known if the intention of the crime was a robbery, or if the criminals had just come in to attack Carol and leave. Her body was found in the store, but she had already passed away. What was described as a heavy investigation took place, but the case quickly went cold. It was picked up again in 2019 in a routine review of cold cases, and 2 individuals from Brighton were arrested. One was a 69-year-old man and the other was a 70-year-old woman. Details of these 2 individuals were not revealed in the press, but there were rumors that the man was part of a Freemasons lodge. Police didn't respond to a Freedom of Information request made in 2020, asking if that had anything to do with the delay in the arrest. Whatever the case, the 2 individuals were not charged, and the case went cold again. In 2021, the case was reviewed again, and again 2 people from Brighton were arrested. Whether this man and woman were the same people who had previously been arrested was not confirmed, but they were also released under investigation. Even though the case seemed to have stalled, police used the publicity to call for information. In particular, there were 3 witnesses police wanted to speak to. The first 2 women were Diane Porter and Suzanne Williams, though police suspected they may have changed their name and moved away from the area in the decades since the crime. The third woman was named Sophia Hedges. Sophia is believed to have changed her name multiple times over the years, and they may have used the names McDonald and Pick. It's also believed she moved to Canada at one point. None of the women are suspects in the case, but police believe they might have information that could lead to another update or solving Carol's cold case completely. Number 3. Internet sleuths led FBI investigators to a major breakthrough when they identified a victim that had been left at the side of the road in 1978. The man was found on December 13th in the Ridley Township, Pennsylvania. The man looks to be in his 20s and had a brown mustache and a scar on his abdomen. He had also been attacked and had been struck multiple times with bullets. Detectives determined that he passed away relatively recently, between 24 hours and 3 days ago. There was no way of identifying the man, and he became a John Doe. The lack of any details about the victim only made finding the person who had taken his life even harder. The case went cold. Years later, the John Doe was placed on NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. There, it drew the attention of multiple online sleuths, including a web sleuths user named Yaya. Yaya noticed similarities between the John Doe and a missing person who had vanished from New Jersey around the same time. Kevin Carroll had been 18 years old when he was discharged from the Air Force due to a medical condition. In late 1978, he sent word to his parents back in Oregon that he would be coming home, and shipped his belongings from McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. He then began the journey home himself, but he never made it home. What happened to Kevin remained a mystery, but Yaya saw similarities between him and with the John Doe. The shape of his face seemed very similar. He was the right height and had the same scar on his abdomen. The fact that the Doe had an earring seemed strange, as that would have been unusual for an airman in the 70s, and Kevin had only recently been discharged. But the biggest problem was with the dates. According to NamUs, Kevin had last been contacted by his family about 4 days after the John Doe was found. It was suspected that this may have been a typo, though. Eventually, Amelia Pern from the Veteran Doe Network took a leap of faith and contacted authorities about the possible identification. They took the tip seriously, and fingerprints from the Doe and Kevin were compared. The fingerprints would turn out to be a match, and Kevin finally got his name back. There's still a lot to do before this case can be closed, though, but investigators hope that now that the victim has a name, people with information might be more likely to come forward. Number 2. The cold case of Lester Rome is a good example of just how quickly cold cases can get hot when the right piece of evidence is found. For a long time, the disappearance of Lester and a body that was discovered in a well in 1986 were thought to be connected, but it was only last year that that was confirmed. Lester was a 58-year-old businessman when he was reported missing in Grand Isle, Louisiana in 1984. Not much progress into the case was made, and his disappearance quickly became a cold case. 2 years later, a landowner in the Sabine parish began work on a well that was on his property. He intended to use the well for his livestock, but it needed to be cleaned up first. He could see a plastic sheet in the well, and when he lifted it out, partial remains came with it. The case became known as the Man in the Well. Only some of his remains had been recovered, and it wasn't enough for police to make any kind of identification. Going into the well would be extremely dangerous and difficult, and investigators at the time opted not to try to recover the rest of the remains. Even in the 80s, there was some belief that the man in the well was Lester. He had been missing for the right length of time for his body to have wound up in the state as the one that was discovered, and pellets embedded in his body's pelvic area matched with an injury Lester had suffered years before he vanished. Police suspected whoever had put Lester in the well had known the area well. This wasn't the sort of place where Lester could have just stumbled into the well by accident. However, there wasn't much evidence for the police to work with, and the case went cold. Finally, in 2021, investigators returned to the cold case. They got permission from the current landowner to try to get the rest of the remains out of the well. A fire department confined spaces team was used to get the body out, as well as evidence that police believed could lead to an arrest. The remains were enough to confirm that the man in the well was in fact Lester. They also determined that he had multiple wounds from a sharp object, and had also suffered a head wound. Less than a year later, news broke that the evidence discovered in the well had led police to Delwyn Sibley, a 74-year-old man. Sibley had been a business associate with Lester, though no motive for why he would have committed the act has been revealed. He was arrested in November of 2021 though, and awaits trial. Number 1. The Doodler is one of the most famous unsolved serial killer cases, but new developments have led police to claim they're closer than ever to catching the criminal. Between 1974 and 1975, the Doodler took the lives of at least 5 men in the San Francisco area. He would target gay men, picking them out at gay bars in the city and sketching them. He would then approach them with the sketch and convince them to leave the bar with him. Once they were in a secluded area, he would take their lives with a bladed weapon and leave them to be found. It was thought that the Doodler probably had more victims. It's known that he had attempted to take the lives of more, and some of the victims that managed to escape were able to give police enough of a description to make a sketch. The information wasn't enough to stop the case from going cold, though. Earlier this year, police announced they believed to have a 6th victim of the Doodler. Warren Andrews was a 52-year-old lawyer who had his life taken in April of 1975. He was found badly injured after being struck by a rock and a tree branch at Land's End. He was taken to the hospital but later passed away. At the time, it wasn't thought that Warren was connected to the Doodler because of the difference in the weapons used. But there were also a lot of similarities between Warren and the other victims, and it was believed Warren had been picked up from a gay bar. Police now believe Warren had initially been attacked by a bladed weapon, but the criminal had lost it when Warren fought back. Detectives investigating the Doodler case also revealed they had recovered DNA evidence from the scene where Warren was found, and the added publicity from a local news campaign had resulted in many more leads. They hope the added publicity and a reward of $200,000 for information could finally close the case for good. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.